People-first organizations will win in the future of work.
Your only real asset is your people.
We all want purpose-driven work.
HR-led organization is the
I'm
future.
sorry, but leaders don't lead empty desks and empty shop floors.
Welcome to the People Strategy Leaders Show. I'm your host, Sri Chalapa, founder and president of Engagedly, and a serial entrepreneur in technology, films, and music. This is where we talk to people leaders, business strategists, and organizational savants about leading in the time of change. What is working, what is not working, and more importantly, what we should be thinking about. Stick around to the end of the show. We will reveal how you can be our next guest. And now, let's engage. Hi, and welcome back. This is Sri Chalapa again with People Strategy Leaders Podcast. Today, we have an impressive guest, Ian Ziskin, who's the president of EXec Group, has 40 years of experience as a business leader, a board advisor, member, coach, consultant, entrepreneur, teacher, speaker, and author. Now, that's quite a mouthful, Ian. And he is the co-founder and partner of Business Insight Group, the co-founder of Consortium for Change, C4C, and the co-founder of the Create Project. His impressive resume includes global leadership as a CHRO or other leadership role in 3 Fortune 100 companies, Northrop Grumman, Quest Communication, and TRW. He has a Master's of Industrial and Labor Relations from Cornell and is a magna cum laude from Binghamton University with a Bachelor's of Science in Management. Ian has also written dozens of articles, blogs, and book chapters in the future of work, HR, leadership, coaching, and HR's role with the board of directors. Welcome to the podcast, Ian.
Great to be with you, Sri. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what obviously piqued our interest when we were talking earlier was this book that you guys wrote, which is really focused on transformational change. So can you talk a little bit about, what prompted you and the team to write The Secret Sauce for Leading Transformational Change?
Yes, of course. Thanks for asking about it. I think it was driven by a few things. First of all, sitting there like all of us in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic, watching what was going on around us in the world, it occurred to me that the whole world was going through significant transformational change, not only directly related to COVID-19, but also economic uncertainty and work being disrupted as people were almost overnight looking to work remotely. Same thing with school, where we were trying to figure out how to educate children and college students remotely as well, and even some of the political divide and discord that was going on around us. And it led me to start thinking about how do you not only survive, but potentially thrive in circumstances of large-scale transformational change. So that was a big driver for us. The second thing was that I happened to lead a consortium of independent coaches and consultants, many of whom are themselves experts in the area of leading transformational change. And we wanted to put together a collaborative effort with a wide variety of different voices and lenses looking at this topic of transformational change, and therefore decided to approach putting a book together using that strategy rather than just have it be, Ian's singular view of the world or singular view of leading transformational change. And that's how we got started with it.
Okay, that's great. And you obviously have quite a few co-authors on this book. So what makes this book different from the other books around, on the subject?
Yeah, I think one thing actually is in fact that, most of the books that I've seen and read, not only on this topic of transformational change, but most other books, particularly business books, tend to be the product of one author, or maybe it's 2 or 3 authors that collaborate. And there's a lot of great books out there, obviously, that have been done in that way. My orientation was a little bit more community minded. I pretty quickly figured out I likely wasn't smart enough to corner all the knowledge on leading transformational change. And so I wanted to surround myself with a lot of other very knowledgeable, passionate people on the topic. So I've grown fond of saying that the book is 200 voices in under 200 pages as a way of getting input from people who've contributed essays, as well as interviews with senior leaders who themselves have led transformational change, as well as input from a survey that we use to gather expertise and input from people who had either led transformational change or been victimized by it in some way.
Mm-hmm.
So in addition to my own voice, there's a couple of hundred other people's voices baked into that. I think that makes it unique. The other aspect, in my humble opinion, that makes it unique is what I mentioned a minute ago about it being, under 200 pages. It seems like from what I hear and what I see in talking to lots of other people, it's getting more and more difficult for people to read books these days. So the 350 or 400 page book that many people used to sit down long enough to read, they rarely do anymore. So if we could be brief, focused, to the point, very practical and pragmatic with the lessons learned and advice that we're offering, I figured that would be a win for everyone as well. That's what I think differentiates it primarily.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, when you have that many authors, you had almost 35 authors. What were the
interviews and essays? Yes, that's right.
That's a lot of work trying to coordinate everybody and then try to get some kind of a common voice. So what are some of the challenges that you encountered, and what are some of the advantages that you talked about, but also disadvantages in putting a project of this magnitude together?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a cat herding exercise to a certain degree, but if you're committed to diversity of thought and perspective, what I found, despite the cat herding aspects of it, I was really pleased to see, even though I didn't know how it would turn out when we started, that there's both a wide variety of different perspectives, some of which actually even disagree or conflict with one another, which I think is healthy, for people who are trying to learn about the topic of leading transformational change. But at the same time, despite the diverse perspectives, a very, very clear pattern of common themes and lessons learned and mistakes and how to avoid those mistakes also began to emerge as we were pulling the book together. So I feel quite good, actually, that we got a balance between different points of view, which we were shooting for, but also common perspective on a number of things that seem to work and not work, related to leading transformational change.
So, one thing that, you talked about early in the book about your father's illness and death. How does that really affect you in terms of the experience and the influence it has in writing this book? I mean, that seems like a very important thing to, go through, obviously, and being able to translate that into your own experience.
Yeah, it was kind of a pivotal time, in my life. I was 11 when my father was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, although it took quite a while, especially in those days, for the doctors to actually figure out what was wrong with him. He went from being fine to bumping into walls and other previously navigable objects, in a relatively short period of time. And then over about a 2-year period of time, had a lot of ups and downs in his health related to multiple sclerosis, and eventually passed away 2 years after being diagnosed. I was 13 at the time. He was just shy of his 47th birthday. So, anybody who's been through that type of experience of, losing a parent or having a parent become seriously ill, would recognize that in and of itself is a fairly traumatic, life-changing kind of experience to go through. A couple of takeaways for me, both then and even more recently as I was writing the book, was the recognition that, first of all, you're not in control of the circumstance, right? There are things that are happening to you that you don't really control. So it's really much more about how you respond to and learn from the situation,
right?
Whether or not you can control or even change this situation. And so therefore, for me, one of the big life lessons was, can you take a circumstance like this, come out of it, despite the negative aspects of it, with being a better person, with a higher degree of self-awareness of what really matters in the world. And then even as it relates to the idea of leading transformational change, which of course is what the book is about, one of the things I write, related to this story was it led me to the conclusion that probably the single most important question related to transformational change in your life or in your organization is answering the question from what to what, because you're now faced with a circumstance of things you can't change, some negative stuff has happened, you're trying to figure out how you're going to learn and grow and make some lemonade out of lemons, if you will, and you want to make sure that you focus on what got you to where you are at this point, what needs to be preserved that's actually pretty good, so that you don't mess that up in the process of making big changes happen. But then focus on the future and where you're heading and what you need to do differently and better in order to get your life back on track, or if you're thinking about it in an organizational context, how you help your organization be more effective. Even at the age of 13, that kind of stuck with me. And so, here we are, 50 years ago, this all happened. Last year was the 50th anniversary of my father's death, but that life lesson has stuck with me all this time. And that's why I included it in the book, because I think it's directly related to the concept of your role in leading transformational change. You have to understand, where are we coming from and where are we going to? And a lot of leaders, frankly, don't do that very well. I think typically they skip over where we've been and they're focused on where we're trying to get to, without understanding how it compares with or is different from, or more importantly, better than where we were previously.
Okay. So talk about the what to what. What is, you just mentioned people don't necessarily look at what got us here. Why is that important as you're planning? Where do you need to go next?
I think the most important reason that understanding where you're coming from matters is there's a big gap between doing things differently and doing them better. I think a lot of people make the mistake as they put change efforts into effect that they're almost satisfied if they can declare the way we're doing it now is different than the way the previous leader used to do it, or the way the organization used to do things. Somehow different is equated with better. You really can't determine whether it's better. You don't have the metrics in place or a basis of comparison if you don't have a good feel for what the organization was doing before and what was working well before and what wasn't working well before. So establishing that baseline, whether it's around personal individual improvement, or whether it's improving something for your team, or whether it's improving something for the organization as a whole, or even at a societal level, you have to understand where you're coming from in order to know whether you've made progress going forward. And I think a lot of leaders, frankly, and a lot of organizations as well, skip over that part because it's not as sexy and interesting. What they want to focus on is, what are we going to do differently in the future? But, one of the biggest mistakes you can make is to equate difference with improvement, because they're not the same.
Yeah, especially if you're a new leader in an organization, the instinct sometimes can be to throw the baby with the bathwater and throw everything away when you realize there are a lot of good things that are being done, and maybe you should keep those and look at things that you can do better.
Yeah, because there are certain things that got you here, as a person or as an organization. You got to this spot by doing certain things well. To your point, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. In the spirit of large-scale change, it's very easy to throw things out without even realizing it, that we're actually working quite well, and you don't want to mess that up.
So in this book, you talk about 7 competing priorities or paradoxes. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? And and why they matter?
Well, in this book, I talk about this challenge, I think, of leading change, where a lot of it's about reconciling competing priorities and mastering paradox. What I ended up calling it was the beauty of and, right? Rather than falling into the trap of it's either or. And there, in the book, I talk about 7 of these paradoxes. I won't talk about all of them here, but let's just pick a couple of examples to illustrate the point. So one of these paradoxes is the importance of facts and feelings. So first, the facts, right? Most organizations tend to try to justify the need for significant transformational change based on some data, some facts that reinforce the fact that we've got to do something differently or better. Extremely important. And the only problem with it is that I think most of us as people have this enormous capacity for dismissing or deflecting or minimizing facts that don't necessarily reinforce our preferred view of the world and the internal environment. We can explain it away. I think the technical scientific term for all that is human nature.
Yes, and confirmation bias, right? Where you have
of course.
Focus on things.
Yeah, and so facts are really important in trying to determine the need for and the justification for and the rationale for significant change. But it turns out because we are human beings, feelings actually matter a lot. And the one example I give in the book is a lot of people are focused on losing weight. They get on the scale and the data is undeniable. We're looking at the data and it says, we were 10 pounds heavier than we might prefer to be. However, just getting on the scale and looking at the data will not actually drive change. You're smart enough to know, we all are, some combination of diet and exercise and maybe some other lifestyle changes are generally what's required in order to lose the 10 pounds. But whether or not you actually take those actions of diet and exercise and stick with it and lose the 10 pounds really has a lot more to do with what's inside of you, your head, your heart, how committed are you to it, how passionate are you about making that change. Getting on the scale, looking at the data isn't going to make any difference if you don't commit yourself to it with a sense of purpose. And that's why it's really important in leading transformational change to be able to reconcile the facts with the feelings. That's one of the paradoxes. Another example that I'll give would be speed and rhythm. So most leaders would say, we want to accelerate the pace of change, create a sense of urgency, move faster than we've historically moved. And I think that's actually right. I think in order to get the kind of traction we need in leading transformational change, we got to be comfortable with moving faster than typically feels comfortable. Right. However, in order to do that well and also bring everybody else along with you, generally speaking, you also have to have a certain pace and a certain cadence with a certain rhythm to get everybody on the same page and well aligned. I play a little bit of guitar. I think about it in terms of music and musicians. It's very infrequent that a musician would say a song is improved simply by playing it faster and getting to the end more quickly. You also have to play the song with a certain rhythm so that everybody else who's part of the band is on the same sheet of music, operating in some degree of harmony, playing off of each other, which makes for much more beautiful music. So in this paradox that we're trying to reconcile, speed without rhythm is basically just noise. Speed at the appropriate rhythm also makes for beautiful music and successful transformational change. And that's probably a second example of one of these paradoxes that needs to be reconciled and appropriately addressed if you're going to successfully lead transformational change.
Yeah, 100%. If people are not dancing to the same beat, then you're going to have a lot of chaos in the organization and discontent as well. So, there are certain things in the book that you talk about. Like one of the chapters in the book is called "Don't Do It." So obviously, some of the things a lot of books talk about do it this way, but there are things that you learn from mistakes. So what are these don't do it mistakes that especially the leaders should be wary of?
Yeah, I'm a firm believer, and became even more so a firm believer in putting this book together, that while it's great to tell people what they should do, it's also important sometimes to point out what you should not do before you focus on what you should do. Again, just a couple of examples of the don't do it's, right? So one of them would be, don't make people feel stupid or disloyal if they push back or ask questions about the change that's being asked of them. I think our natural tendency is to say, particularly as a leader, we articulate this need for change. We want people to be enthusiastic about it, big supporters, salute, and come along for the important journey. And while that expectation is right in a lot of ways, there's tremendous value sometimes that gets lost by ignoring or diminishing or dismissing or marginalizing the people who actually ask tough questions,
right,
and are a bit skeptical, where they're essentially helping to seek the truth about what are we really trying to do here, and why is it so important. And I think you end up with a better end product, a better result, a better process too, of leading big change, if you're more welcoming of, accepting of the people who push back and ask tough questions. So if you put a lot of energy into making them feel dumb for asking those questions, or try to make them seem disloyal because they're asking those tough questions, that's actually very counterproductive, I would have to say. The other example I'll offer here, we were just talking about a minute ago, so I want to reinforce it, which is this idea of ignoring data that doesn't reinforce our preferred view of the internal or external environment. I think individuals, but maybe even more so large organizations in particular, have this amazing capacity to dismiss and ignore data. So a lot of times, change comes at us. I actually think there's a misconception about change, which I talk about in the book, and that is, most people tend to think that good transformational change is really all about anticipating, seeing around corners, understanding what's coming at us, being well prepared for what's coming at us, and therefore, by definition, that is somehow thought of as strategic. There's plenty of great examples of being anticipatory and strategic in leading change, but I actually think there's a lot more examples of we didn't see it coming, we didn't anticipate it, it was circumstances beyond our control, we weren't very well prepared for it, yet we had to somehow react and do something. And sometimes it is a complete surprise, but I think there are many times when the data's out there, it's floating around, it's in smaller chunks, we're not really paying attention to it, mostly because it doesn't fit with our preferred view of the world. Yeah. So we tend to ignore it, and then we get whacked in the face. One of my favorite quotes related to this, Mike Tyson, the heavyweight boxer, he was being interviewed in advance of a heavyweight bout that he was about to fight, and the interviewer was asking about his strategy for the fight, and basically he said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And I think that's really true for individuals, but organizations as well. We're getting punched in the mouth, constantly by big surprises. COVID is a really good example of this. And then you have to figure out how you're going to survive and thrive and make it all work, despite the fact you didn't necessarily see it coming. So, don't ignore the data just because it doesn't fit your preferred view. That would be another don't do it.
Yeah, no, those are some really good ones, Ian. So last a couple of more questions here that I wanted to ask you about. One is for this pizza thing. So it's called Pizzanology, and there's a book. There's a chapter in your book called Pizzanology. Can you talk about what pizza's got to do with transformational change?
We kind of asked this question of, what the blank does pizza have to do with leading transformational change? And it turns out a lot. So here's my way of thinking about it, this pizza analogy that you're referring to. Go back a lot of years, 997 AD in Gaeta, Italy. That's when pizza was thought to be invented. So that's a lot of years ago with a lot of tradition. It's now, $150 billion global industry. There's a lot of people who love pizza around the world. However, here's the interesting thing. If you think about, despite all the traditions and what we tend to think about with pizza, and you look at the changing nature of shapes, sizes, toppings, cheeses, crusts, preparations of how pizza gets prepared, distribution outlets of where you can get pizza from, and of course the evolving nature of all the secret sauces that go along with pizza. Pizza is no longer pizza. It's evolved in a multitude of ways, all in the effort of trying to stay relevant to the consumer, despite the fact that there are a lot of external and internal factors and trends that are challenging the industry, and
right.
The food itself. And so, the reason why this became so important in my mind was, every individual, every organization has a similar set of challenges with falling in love with, history and tradition and the way it used to be and what we prefer it to be. But the recognition, in fact, that if you want to be relevant, you've also got to reimagine, reinvent, reposition yourself, your team, your organization, and maybe even the society that you're part of, in order to continue to be relevant. It's true with pizza, and it's true with leading transformational change. And one of my favorite quotes around this was, believe in yourself. If cauliflower can become pizza, you can become anything.
Right.
I think it's a great way of illustrating how things have to continue to evolve if they're going to remain relevant.
Yeah. Well, that's all the time we have, Ian, but I wanted to just do a shout out for your book. It's called The Secret Sauce of Leading Transformational Change. So Ian, where can they find this book, and where should they learn more about you?
Best one-stop shop for the book is www.transformationalchangebook.com, where people can find not only access for purchasing the book at a discount, but some chapter summaries and background bios and all the contributing authors, as well as the opportunity, if they'd like, to schedule some speaking engagements related to the book. And they can also learn more about me right there as well. And Sri, I really appreciate you making the time for me today. It's been great to be with you.
All right, awesome. Thanks a lot, Ian. It's been a wonderful to have you on. I need to get you back on here to talk about some of your background and experience in leading transformational change at your organizations that you've been part of. So I look forward to having you back again in the future. Thank you again.
With you. Thanks.
Okay. Bye.
Sri Chalapa here. Thank you so much for listening to the People Strategy Leaders podcast. If you are a successful leader or a people strategist who would like to be on this program, please visit engagedly.com/People Strategy Leaders podcast. If you got something out of this interview, would you share this episode on social media? If you know someone that would be a great guest, tag them on social media to let them know about the show, and include the hashtag People Strategy Leaders. I love seeing your posts and guest suggestions. We are regularly putting out new episodes and content. To make sure you don't miss any episodes, go ahead and subscribe. Your thumbs up, ratings, and reviews go a long way to help promote the show and mean a lot to me and my team. Want to know more? Follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter at Sri Chalapa. Thanks for listening. We will see you next time. And thank you to Patrick Ramsey, sound engineer at Kalinga Production Studios, for recording and mixing this show.